Okay, so female reproduction. This is our duct system. The eggs develop in the follicles in our ovaries, then travel to the fallopian tubes, and then ultimately into the uterus, then into the cervix, and ultimately out the vagina. So we start out with primordial follicles containing primary oocytes. And this is the state in which all of the eggs exist up until puberty. So every single egg is a primary oocyte, and every single follicle is a primordial follicle up from birth up until puberty. Once puberty hits, we get a surge in the hormones FSH and LH. So we start having FSH and LH hormones. FSH is going to cause follicle development because it is follicle stimulating hormone. So FSH is going to stimulate these primordial follicles with follicular cells to get a little bit bigger. And now the cells surrounding our primary oocyte are called granulosa cells. And this primary follicle has, in addition to the granulosa cells surrounding our primary oocyte, it's got a sort of candy-like coating called the zona pellucida. So the zona pellucida surrounds the egg. Granulosa cells surround the zona pellucida. FSH stimulates the continued development where our primary follicle develops into a secondary follicle still with a primary oocyte inside. In a secondary follicle, we're going to create this sort of little open space called the antrum, which is actually filled with fluid. And we now develop an additional set of cells outside of the granulosa cells called theca interna cells. And the theca interna plus those granulosa are going to start to make the hormone estrogen. And so, as we know, estrogen is going to feed back negatively and it's going to turn off FSH. It's going to feed forward positively and it's going to cause a surge in LH. And so, this surge in LH is going to trigger our now vesicular follicle, still with a primary oocyte. It's going to trigger that vesicular follicle. The LH surge causes that vesicular follicle to extrude that primary oocyte. And this is called ovulation. And when that oocyte is kind of spit out from the vesicular follicle, that allows the oocyte to complete meiosis 1. So now, after ovulation, we have we've extruded the oocyte, which is now a secondary oocyte with its zona pellucida and the granulosa cells that directly surround the oocyte called the corona radiata. And so this oocyte is now located in the fallopian tubes and it's traveling down there. And we have two possible situations. Additionally, the estrogen that we made during our secondary and vesicular follicles is stimulating the proliferative phase of our uterine cycle. So now we have our oocyte, which is now secondary. We've made one polar body, which is just a useless sort of packet of DNA that will be discarded. We have our secondary oocyte, and now we have two options. First option is a sperm makes its way into the fallopian tube and fertilizes that oocyte. If that is the case, that oocyte is going to complete meiosis 2, and we end up with 1, 2, 3 polar bodies and 1 fertilized ovum. Now, after ovulation has occurred in our follicle, we're left with the structure that used to be the follicle and is now called the corpus luteum. Corpus luteum makes progesterone. Progesterone then stimulates the secretory phase in the uterus. And so, if that sperm made it in, if that sperm fertilized the egg, we now have this nice sort of nourishing, hospitable environment for that fertilized egg to implant within the uterus. So this is the uterine cycle. So if that happens, corpus luteum is going to hang out for about 3 months and it's going to make progesterone. If fertilization does not occur, then this secondary oocyte will be shed with this uterine lining. This uterine lining will be shed when we have no more hormones to keep it going. So when we have decreased levels of estrogen, when we have decreased levels of progesterone, we then shed this stratum functionalis, and this is the beginning of our menstrual phase. So here are our hormonal controls that we can see. And we can see how each of these is controlling what they ultimately are going to control. So FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, you can see as its levels are rising, our follicle is developing. As FSH causes follicle development, we now have our theca interna cells, which make estrogen, and so estrogen levels rise. When estrogen levels rise, that's going to cause a surge in LH. The surge in LH is what triggers ovulation. So an LH surge triggers ovulation. Ovulation causes formation of our corpus luteum, which then makes progesterone, and progesterone levels will increase. When we have high levels of progesterone, you can see LH is this blue, we have low levels of LH. So if we have high levels of progesterone, then that means that you cannot have high levels of LH, and thus you cannot ovulate. And so that's why progesterone is the active ingredient found in most birth controls. If fertilization did occur, that corpus luteum will persist for about 3 months until the placenta is formed. If it does not occur, it'll persist for a week to maybe 14 days, and then it will just degenerate. If that's the case and it does degenerate, progesterone levels will fall, which will then trigger the shedding of the stratum functionalis, which is our menstrual cycle, and then we start the cycle all over again.